In today's video, I'm going to be comparing Photoshop and Luminar Neo's AI removal tools to help you declutter your images. Before using either of these tools, I had two major concerns. The first one, that it was going to take much longer than the clone stamp tool, and the second one being that it was going to create some really funky results. Let's see if either of those things comes true and which of these platforms comes out on top. So AI is everywhere in photography at the moment, and sometimes it can be an absolute game changer, and other times it can kind of look a little bit like, well, this. Both Luminar and Adobe claim they're going to help you speed up your workflow and declutter your images quickly using their generative AI tools. I'm going to compare both of the platforms using two different photos with common situations that you might find yourself in as a photographer. So in this first image here, we've got a little landscape that has got people dotted through it that we'd kind of want to remove. And then in the second one, we've got this reflection that has got these foreground elements, that we'd quite like to get rid of. So I'm going to run through each of these on each platform and see which one comes out best. Okay, so we're going to start with Photoshop. Now, if you've got the latest version of Photoshop, you should just be able to select the lasso tool, however you want to say that word, and just start selecting things with it, and it will give you the generative AI options. So if we go over to this image here, you'll see there are a couple of people dotted around that I would quite like to remove. So I'll have a little zoom in on that. And really, all you have to do with this tool is draw around the thing that you want to remove, leave the prompt blank, and it should, in theory, take it away. So if we start here and we have a little draw around this person, all we've got to do is complete the circle, select generative fill, click generate, and it will use machine learning to sort of identify the patterns within the image and try and replicate the background that is behind this person. Now, I do kind of like this loading bar that they've got there. That feels really nice. You can kind of see that it is working, even though it does typically like load to 90% and then wait for a little while. But you typically only wait in a couple of seconds. And you'll see that it has got rid of that person really, really, really effectively. Using this tool, you can also select different generations of this, different iterations, sorry. So if you click the little arrows here, you'll be able to go through and select a different pattern. Now, of the three of them, I think that one kind of works best. That looks the most natural to me. Now, the drawback to this tool is that you do have to select elements individually. But let's see if we can like clump people together and get a good result that way. So if I was to draw around, zoom in, sorry, and then draw around these two people, does it do as good a job working on things in bulk? Let's have a look. Click generative fill again, generate, and let's see what comes out. So that has got rid of those people remarkably well. I'm really impressed with this, to be honest. Adobe aren't sponsoring this video, by the way. If you'd like to sponsor the video, Adobe, please feel free. But they're not sponsoring this video. I'm just really, really, really impressed with that result. Let's see what some of the other iterations look like. Again, that's fantastic. That's also really good. So I would probably go with the second iteration, to be honest. I think that works really well. So I'm going to now step away from the camera, finish this image up, and then we'll jump over to Luminar and see how it works on this image as well. Okay, so we're over in Luminar Neo now, and we're going to use what they call their Gen Erase tool. If you use the Erase tool in Lightroom, or if you've used Luminar before and used their Erase tool, it is very similar in terms of its interface. So just select the Gen Erase tool from the sidebar there, you get a couple of dancing graphics, and then you get this simple removal screen that you can play around with. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in. Let's take it to about 50% and see how well it removes these elements from this image in comparison to Photoshop. Unlike the lasso tool, you can select multiple elements individually. So what we're going to do is we're going to make this a little bit smaller, select this person here, this person there, and it is literally just click to draw. Let's go back to this fella here. That should just be one click. Let's go around these people as well and see what kind of results we get by trying to do it en masse. We'll take this gentleman out of the image as well. Let's click erase. It uses machine learning to try and do this, much like Photoshop does as well. You kind of get this dancing graphic that I'm not a huge fan of. I like a progress bar so I can see how far along this is, or at least you get a sense that like time is moving, whereas this dancing element doesn't really do much for me. However, like it looks pretty nice. And if this can do this all it's like en masse, that'd be really, really useful and a lot quicker than using the clone stamp tool, which is a big selling point for tools like this. So let's see what results it comes up with. Not great, really. I'm a little bit surprised by that. Like, some of them aren't necessarily noticeable, so you can toggle the thing on and on by clicking the eye here and see what has been removed and what's not. And I think once you see where the people are originally, it's really, really telling. So they're really quite blurry. It's relatively blurred out. This line's off. But unlike Photoshop, you can't select to have multiple iterations of this using the Generate tool. So on Photoshop, there was a little arrow you could click, you could get 1, 2, or 3 version of this. This, you're kind of stuck with what you've got. Okay, let's move on to the reflection image and see the kind of results that we get here. Now, this is something I would spend an awful lot of time with the clone stamp tool trying to fix in post. So I'm hoping that the AI can make this a lot easier for me. We've got our lasso tool, and I'm just going to go around and start selecting some of these elements and see how we get on. So it is a little bit annoying that I'm going to have to do these step by step. There's a lot of these, probably 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, about 8 or 9 elements that I would like to remove from the image in this. So it's going to be relatively time intensive to remove them. But if the first image is anything to go by, it's going to be a little bit quicker than using the clone stamp. Wow, again, okay, like that looks very good and matches into the image really well. And actually, I think that first one, nope, maybe the second one, the third one? The third one I'm going to go for. That's worked out really, really, really well. Let's see how it handles then a slightly larger element in this image. Let's see how it looks when we try and get rid of this large swath of sand here. We'll draw around there. Let's see how it does. Let's draw that. We're probably going to have to draw down the edge and come back in. I will speed this bit up, so don't worry about it. Okay, that took an awful long time. That's a long time to have a camera pointed in your face where nothing's happening. But as we can see, again, the results are worth the time and effort. Like, this looks seamless, especially that second iteration there. That looks incredible. Now, was that quicker than using the clone stamp tool? Well, it depends when you start getting into the nitty gritty, but it was a lot less effort for me to use as well, and the results don't look weird or funky at all. So once again, I'm going to step away from this image. I'm going to finish editing it using the lasso tool, and then we'll jump over to Luminar. Back to Luminar now. Let's see if this performs well with something that's a little bit more pattern-based than trying to remove people. Removing people can often be quite confusing and complicating for a tool like this, I imagine. So let's see how Luminar performs with a simple reflection and trying to match up patterns. So we've got the tool selected again. Let's jump in here and start removing something. So I'll start in exactly the same place. I'm going to do it en masse. Let's see how long this takes now to actually generate. Okay, so that was a lot quicker than Photoshop, especially for like what was selecting all of the elements at once. And the results are, they're still not great, but they're not as bad as they were in the last image. So at a quick glance, you'd be forgiven for missing this change here, for example. Some of the clouding around here just looks a little bit fuzzy, but it's not anything that would massively draw the eye. This bit looks relatively good, to be honest. It looks like there's some texture on the water, save for this one little line here that was included in the selection. It is really annoying, though, that you can't just regenerate this and get new results. I think this would be really good if it was iterative and you could select a couple of times and see how to just like how it looks with different variations. Okay, so that one's kind of finished. So I'm going to save all the images and I'll show you a side-by-side comparison, and let's see if you can figure out which one is done by which. Let's compare these side by side now and see which one's got the better result. So at the zoomed out level, I feel like it's still pretty obvious which one is which. There's been no other editing applied to this since then. This is purely what came out in the tool. So for the reflections, I'll give you 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. So the image on the right is from Photoshop, the image on the left is from Luminar. I think that's pretty obvious because of this strip here, if you picked up on that earlier in the image. But you can just see that, like, comparing the clouds here, the lighting's just a little bit off. These foreground elements, admittedly, I've left that in, that's on me. These things missing. Now, it took a lot longer to create the image on the right-hand side in Photoshop. That is something to point out. It took a very long time to go around and select each individual element. Selecting the big area there was also relatively tough. However, I do feel that the results speak for themselves in this image. Now, when we're zoomed out, it is quite hard to tell the difference, and I am actually quite surprised by that, to be honest. I thought this was going to be really obvious when I opened it up. However, at this zoomed out view, it is much trickier to say which one is which than I had initially thought. So that is really quite interesting. So I'm going to give you a couple of seconds again to try and figure out which image is which. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so the image on the left was Photoshop, the image on the right was done in Luminar. And that then becomes a little bit more obvious when you zoom in to the details. So as we get in a little bit closer, you start to see like some of the blurring here that is just not evident in the image on the other side. Right, Photoshop has done a much sharper job of this. It looks a lot better across the image as a whole. Now, it does look like there's some form of saturation applied to this. I've not done any other edits to this at all. This is the same file that has been edited in exactly the same way using these two tools. I just think Photoshop does a much better job, especially when you start looking up here. Right, so again, these two bits, this looks like a perfectly straight line. You couldn't tell that any editing's been done. Whereas here, this looks like someone's done a relatively bad job with the clone stamp tool. So if we zoom out again, or if we look at it from a level that someone might be looking at it like the human eye level, you start to see some of the inconsistencies if you're looking for them, especially like around here. For example, like this bit of removal looks really clunky compared to that. So I would say Photoshop has won this hands down. So what's the verdict? As I've just said, I think Photoshop wins this hands down. It takes a little bit more time to use. You have to be a little bit more sort of specific with the areas that you're getting rid of. However, it just comes out with great results. And what might feel like a lot of waiting around is actually just time you would have spent with the clone stamp tool. So you're saving yourself a lot of effort. And I imagine it is a little bit quicker than a clone stamp, especially for like some of those bigger areas like we saw in the reflection. For Luminar, I just don't see the benefit of the Gen Erase tool beyond the normal erase tool. Maybe it works really well for like tiny little spots and getting rid of like dust spots and things like that. However, at the moment, the technology just doesn't seem to be there from Luminar, especially like without the opportunity to try different variations to see how different generative AI outputs would look in the image. So I think all of this is quicker than using the clone stamp tool. None of the results look super funky, and you actually get some really, really, really good outcomes from it. So I highly recommend using these tools. Let me know what your experience is with both of them, and I'll see you in the comments. Take care.